Really, with a handful of exceptions, vinegar kombucha, tempeh, koji. Fermentation's anaerobic. If you ask a biologist what is fermentation, like they're going to say fermentation is anaerobic metabolism. Fermentation is the production of energy without oxygen. The cells of our bodies are capable of fermentation. Mostly we operate under respiration. That's the efficient way in which our cells produce energy. But sometimes we exert ourselves. Like I'm trying to push this, 300-pound island all by myself, and I'm using every ounce of strength that I have. Or, I'm trying to lift something I can barely lift. I'm trying to sort of run faster than my body is usually able to run. I am demanding that my cells produce more energy than I'm providing oxygen for. So they revert to this alternative mode of energy production, fermentation, where they can produce energy without oxygen. It's less efficient because it produces a byproduct, lactic acid. When you start feeling that burn in the muscle you were just exerting, that's lactic acid. So for biologists, fermentation is by definition anaerobic, and they would consider vinegar, kombucha, tempeh, koji to be, oxymoronic ferments or something else. That's like, aerobic microbial transformation, like something like that. So, but for making sauerkraut, for making yogurt, for making sourdough, for making alcohol, none of them need oxygen. The vast majority of ferments don't need oxygen. So the question of the cap is really a question of off-gassing. It's not that any of it needs oxygen, it's just that at some point in a tight vessel, it's going to need to escape. So, probably some of us, especially people who have been trying to bottle kombucha, water kefir, other, sort of sweet, active beverages.
Ginger beer.
It's very possible to explode bottles from that pressure. So the only issue with this is that off-gassing. So, as long as you don't put them on completely tight, or if you can manually off-gas them, or if you're interacting with them every day, it really doesn't matter. So the flow of oxygen, it can dry out the surface, it can cause molds to form on the surface. And that's why, the surface is always the most vulnerable place, because that's where the interface with the oxygen comes. And so you get these other forms of life flourishing on the surface. You get more biodiversity. The permaculturalists tell us that the edge is always the site of the greatest biodiversity. And every fermentation, really, you can get to, see like a vivid illustration of that. From the funky stuff that grows on the top, if you don't disturb it, if you don't stir it, if you don't drown the aerobic things before they have a chance to develop.
Well, the other problem with introducing oxygen near your food is that it oxidizes. And now there's a field of study, or it is being studied, that you shouldn't eat oxidized food, because we're always going to the supermarket looking for high in antioxidants, because those break down or take away the bad things that oxidation does to food. So you eat a lot of antioxidant food to counteract that. So here we're making our ferments, we're trying to avoid oxidizing our food.
Oxygen will degrade vitamin C over time. A lot of nutrients are degraded by that. When you have your jar of jelly that can develop some mold in the refrigerator, that's air. If we would just take all of our half-empty jars and consolidate them into smaller jars, our food would last much, much longer. Well, you're definitely much less likely to develop surface yeasts and molds if you protect the surface from oxygen. All those things are a function of access to oxygen.
Okay.
So the fancy tanks, I guess I haven't brought you guys down to my cellar to show you my variable capacity fermentation tank that has 200 liters of radish kraut. That's designed so that there's never any airspace. The top just goes down to whatever the level that it's in. With these, the way I'm usually doing it, I can tell you this outside when I open this up, there's a little stuff starting to develop on the surface of that. So the more you can protect the surface. So the simplest way is take a nice strong plastic food storage bag, like a Ziploc bag, put some water in it. Better yet, put some salty water in it, some brine, so if it happens to leak, you're not sort of lowering the salt level a lot of your ferment. And just like put that bag of brine in to hold your veggies down, and it'll just spread to the surface and protect your surface from oxygen. But the more you can protect things from oxygen, the less problem you'll have with funk. All the traditional ways of doing it, funk grows on the surface. When Mara and I were in Sichuan province, we visited this restaurant, like huge, like kind of restaurant with all these banquet rooms and dozens of people in the kitchen, and could seat hundreds of people. And then they had a separate building, like a shack nearby that they took us to, where they were doing all their fermenting of their pickles. And the guy had one that he wanted to show us, but he had to open up 10 different big vessels. I mean, these were probably 50 or 100 liter vessels. And he's like opening up, looking for the one that he wants to show us to taste. But all of them have just the film that I've seen 100 times. And it's it's probably calm yeast, mostly little patches of mold. He just mixed it back in. He didn't give it a thought. He just mixed it back in. And I get emails all the time oh my God, do I have to throw it away? I have this stuff growing, but can I just mix it back? It's more or less inevitable. Unless you engineer some way to keep the oxygen out. And if you're really put off by it, and also over time that surface growth will degrade it. The longer you let that sit and grow, the deeper it'll penetrate, the more the flavor will begin to be recognizable in it. So I like to just skim it off if I notice it. But I'm not that put off by it.